Okay.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our monthly webinar, Beyond the Field. I'm your moderator, Amanda McLean, the Farm Management Specialist here with North Dakota Farmers Union. As the intent of these webinars are to provide you with the latest information and have in-depth conversations with our experts. These webinars are held the third Thursday of each month at 10 a.m. Central Time. And as you know, if you've signed up for one, you are signed up and reminded for each coming up topic. As today's topic, we will be talking with Dr. Tim Petrie from NDSU Extension on livestock egg market update and outlooks. If you join us in September, we will have a farm bill, or at least the big beautiful bill update with the National Farmers Union legislative team on September 18th. A few housekeeping tips before we get started. Everyone is on mute, but at any time, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to type them into the chat and Q&A, and we will have time for questions at the end of this presentation. Also, this webinar is being recorded, and you can find it by going to YouTube and searching North Dakota Farmers Union. We also ask that you please take the exit survey at the end of this webinar, as it helps to continue to build these webinars and bring content that is relevant that you guys would like to hear. So with that, I would like to introduce today's guest speaker, Tim Petrie. Tim was raised on a livestock ranch in northwest North Dakota. He graduated from North Dakota State University with a major in agricultural economics. Then he served 2 years in the U.S. Army and then returned to NDSU and completed a graduate degree in agricultural economics with an emphasis in agricultural marketing. He is the Extension Livestock Marketing Economics in the Department of Agribusiness and Applied Economics at NDSU. Tim travels extensively in North Dakota and the surrounding states, conducting meetings on livestock supply and demand, fundamentals affecting prices, price risk management, and marketing educational topics. His monthly marketing advisor columns are published in local, regional, and national agricultural and livestock publications. With that, I will turn it over to you, Tim.
Okay. Thank you very much, Amanda. And thank you to the Farmers Union for having me. And good morning, everybody. It's a great time, at least for me, to talk about livestock prices, particularly if you're selling livestock, if you're buying maybe, more of a tighter margin there. But anyway, great to be with you. Let's just move along here. I'm just going to put in a little plug for a couple of things that we offer. I'm talking to you today, and maybe you won't hear me again for a long time. So a way to keep up is our department offers two things. First, we offer a newsletter called Ag by the Numbers. Comes out once a month. We're working on actually in the summer, July and August is we do one together, but otherwise we do one every month, and we're just doing our September one now that'll come out the first week in September. But that just, there are six of us here in the department, and usually each one write this was my last article about lower beef production but still high compared to what the beef herd is, and we'll talk about that more. But again, go through crops and farm bill and everything else. So if you want that, simply the best way, just Google NDSU of egg by the numbers and something. It'll come. You sign up, and then it's just emailed to you once a month. The other thing we do is also a webinar, and we do it once a month right after the WASDE report comes out, World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates, or as soon as it comes out, or sometimes right on the date. So we're doing one again this afternoon. So you don't have to tune into that, because if you only want livestock, but if you want crops, farm bill, and other stuff, that's this afternoon at 1 o'clock. They're also taped so that you could look at them later. And then, another one September 8th, October 9th, and so on. So again, to sign up for that, you just you do NDSU Egg Market Outlook or something. You don't have to, that website, as long as you help yourself to that if you want to, free of charge. And so let's move along here. So I'm just going to start off. There are a lot of questions major questions that I'm getting now, and the main one is when will herd rebuilding start, or has it started? In fact, we will talk about that. How long do we expect these higher prices to continue with us? How are tariffs affecting the market and may affect the market? And those are some of the major questions I'm getting and that we'll cover today. But I'll start off with the January 1st cattle inventory report. You cattle producers are aware that at least some of you, if you're in the sample, get a questionnaire in the mail from NASS. And so a survey is done of all of at least a sample of livestock producers. So January 1st is the major one. Another one usually is issued in July, and I will get to that in a minute. But the January one is much more extensive, state by state basis, so it allows us to look at regional differences and so on, while the July one is only for the U.S. But I'm not going to go through all these numbers. I don't like to have a lot of numbers on a chart anyway. But the big thing here is just I want to start with the right-hand column, which we expected on January 1st. The cattle numbers would be down in just about all categories, because of the dry weather, and this would, the sixth year of numbers going down, and we did expect that. And so, look at all those numbers. They were declines. Uh, the decline in beef cows there of 0.5% was not as much as some people expected, but it was no surprise to me. And because we've moderated, and when we look at the chart, we will see that, and with more moisture in place. But everything was down except dairy cattle, dairy cows. Actually, they were up fractionally. It doesn't show up here when you round off the numbers, but everything else was down. And so obviously, lower numbers are supportive to prices, and certainly one of the reasons why we have the high prices we do. But there's more to the story than that. So let's move along. I like to use charts rather than numbers. So on the top then is the cattle cycle in motion, and what we've been doing. Our previous high numbers were in 2019, the beef cow inventory at 31.6 million head. And then, like I said, 6 years decline because of the drought all over the U.S. We've had, 2021 was very, very dry in North Dakota, and get a little better conditions since, but dry in the western part of the state. We've had USDA livestock forage payments for drought every year for the last number of years, and even including this year when it was dry to begin with. But this just kind of move along here. Our previous cyclical low was in 2014 at just the right close to 29 million head there, and that's when we had the previous record high prices. So no surprise now that we've moved back down to that level and even below that. Now we have record prices again. So in 2023, really, really dry. So you see, we went down about 1 million head in 2023, and 926,000. I want you to remember that number because that's a very important number. And then you see the moderation there, then about 150,000 down last year. Again, some people thought it might be more than that, but I'm in agreement with that for some of the reasons I'm going to talk about in a minute. So we ended up with 27.86 million head. And likely that is the cyclical low. There is indication that, there for sure there's interest in herd rebuilding where it is allowed, and that will go up. Now, the big question that I'm getting is, we go back to that last cycle in 2014, into 15, we increased numbers, somewhat, and then numbers just skyrocketed in 2016, and that's, caused prices to go down. We'll look at the prices in a minute here. And so the question I'm getting are, if we are increasing this year, and so by January 1st numbers will be up, are they going to skyrocket back up like they did last time? And the answer to that is, at least in the near term, likely not. And that's explained by the bottom chart where we have the number of beef replacement heifers on January 1st. And so, we're down there at at now at the lowest on the chart at 4.65 million head or so. And the important thing then is let's go back and look. In 2014, you see we had over 5.55 million head of replacements right away to start 2014. So that allowed herd rebuilding, and then up to 6 million head in 2000 in 16, and that's why we rebuilt. But you see we're at relatively low levels there, so we're rebuilding now. We don't have the replacement heifers to actually enter back into the herd like we had back then. We are going to rebuild the herd sometime, and likely are doing some of it now, but we don't have the firepower there, so to speak, to increase at the rate that we did last time, at least for another year or so. So the reason why we think maybe we're at the low and maybe even some herd rebuilding took place is here is the change in beef cow numbers last year. And to begin with, I just want to go through the most important beef cow states, the numbers there. And so we just start with Texas is the biggest, and then we go up to Oklahoma, Missouri, right up to South Dakota, right up to Nebraska and South Dakota, and right on up. North Dakota is number 8. Move over a couple outliers are the ninth place is over there's Kentucky, and then the 10th place is Florida. But anyway, 6 of those top 10 states last year increased numbers. It's just that the rest of the states, declined enough for us to go down 150,000. But we kind of interesting in numbers, we went up about 150,000 in those 6 states, the top 10 states. So you see Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Montana, North Dakota, Florida, all increased numbers, indicating that there was interest, and some of those other states were drier. So we're from a January 1st basis, we're probably at the low last January 1st, and we likely, and we'll look at the weather in a minute, are probably going to go up a little bit, but not dramatically, as I said before, because we simply don't have the replacement heifers to do that. So on July 1st, the USDA did do a survey just, for the total US this year. And and unfortunately, however, due to budget restraints, they didn't do one last year. They didn't do one in 2016 or 2013 because of budget reasons. So, this is a really good reason, particularly for you to work with your congressman and urge the the Congress to provide money to USDA NAS to do a survey, because looking then, just looking at particularly, it'd be interesting to know if we did rebuild the herd by July. And in fact, I think we probably did. But in 2023, we're at 29 million head. We're at 28.65 now. But what was it last year? So we don't know that. My guess is we were probably down to about 28.5 last July. That's just because I, keep track of things, but it is not official. It is not USDA. It's just my stab at 20.5. And if it was 28.5, that means by this July, we did increase up to 2065. May or may not have, but that's just my thought based on the weather and the fact that those 6 states did increase and so on. But it really, really been nice to have a report last year. And, it's water under the bridge. We can't do that, but we're hopeful that USDA will be able to continue that report on July 1st. So then we go back on the top then to replacement heifers. And again, kind of the same story. It shows there without July. I'm thinking that probably we had about the same amount of replacement heifers in 2024 as this year, and down there at about 3.7 or so, and but we don't know that. But I think probably we had around the same amount of replacement heifers this July 1st that last time, and probably by next year more. The one important thing that the report did give us is the July report always gives us the first estimate of our calf crop for this year. And so there's the estimating 33.1 million head calf crop. Again, look on the chart, look back compared to 2014. The calf crop is low. It was very similar in 2023 and 2024, but low numbers. So that's why we have the prices that we have now is just because we have a historical low calf crop there. So that is a good thing that we did get out of the report. We assumed that probably the calf crop would be down, and this just officially confirms it. So, the reason why that herd rebuilding is likely started and has started is due to the weather. When we did the January 1st, go back to the end of last year in October, how dry it was in most of the U.S. and particularly in that area where the top cows are from Texas on up through North Dakota, extremely dry there. USDA, when the drought monitor comes out with a similar chart, and on the bottom, the dark green, like I showed you before, where the cattle are from Texas up through North Dakota and so on, and some then over and big ones over in Kentucky and Florida. The drought is the red superimposed on that, and very, very dry in that. So that kind of held back any herd rebuilding last year. On the bottom, then about almost 60% of the cows were in an inventory with drought, and they had been for the last few years, and that's why numbers went down. Jump to the drought monitor that just came out this morning. Tremendous improvement in cattle country all the way from Texas on up through North Dakota and Montana and Kentucky and Florida and so on. And so, North Dakota now is drought free. We have a little, the yellow is abnormally dry, a little bit up in the northeastern part of the state, but, a lot of moisture, particularly here after the spring. I know if you're making hay or now if you want to combine wheat, maybe struggling with that. It was a tough haymaking year, but, it means we've got grass and all the way down through Texas. And certainly that's going to mean that we can keep uh, not not sell as many cows, keep more replacement heifers, and so rebuilding has probably started now down to about 15% of the cattle. It's always dry down in some place in Texas. It's such a big state in western Texas, a little drought down there. And then, it is dry out in the mountain states as well, but not as many cattle out there. But, so there's areas suffering with drought, and that isn't saying the drought might come back again, but certainly conducive now in the major cow-calf states for some keeping some more heifer calves than we have, and with the prices that we have. So, the media and all the attention gets on the size of the beef cow herd. And yes, the total cow herd, this is actually dairy cows and beef cows, the tan line there. The number of animals are important and they're low, and that is supportive to prices. But really, it's the pounds of beef that we produce, not the number of head, that's important in determining prices. And so, as you can see there, for many years, up until 1975, our cow herd increased. In 1950, we had the same amount of beef cows as dairy cows, and then the dairy cow numbers declined and the beef cow numbers continued up. So we peaked in 1975. But since then, we've been going down, but beef production has continued to increase. In fact, in 2022, we had record high beef production in 2022, up at 28.2 billion pounds there, and we backed off. Interesting, 23 and 24, we had the same beef production in those years. Even though the cow herd went down, beef production stayed the same as 2024, and we're going to talk about that. Now, beef production, this is the prediction for this year, that for us to be down some to about 26 billion there. Again, we'll have to see how it turns out. That's USDA's prediction now. And actually, back to begin 24, they predicted it to be down, and it didn't turn out that way. And we'll talk about why that is in a minute. So another thing on the cattle cycle, then you see that every cyclical high since 1975 has been lower than the previous cyclical high, and that is going to happen this cycle as well that we're in. We're going to rebuild the herd, but it will not go up to the 40 near 41 million head. It won't, and so we're going to talk about some of the reasons why beef production was the same in last year, the previous year, and why that we simply don't need as many cows as we do, and the cycle will not go up as high as numbers, but we're still going to produce a lot of beef. So on the top then just shows us beef production in a little bit more detail there. And so there's again in 2022, the record high there, beef production at 28.2 billion pounds. Then in 2023 and 24, right at 27 billion pounds. And USDA's prediction this year is for 26 billion pounds. And really, the main reason down is because of lower slaughter numbers. So far this year, uh, uh, steer slaughter is down 3.4%, and heifer slaughter now is starting. We were having a lot of heifers on feed, and now there are less heifers on feed, and so our heifer slaughter is down so far this year 4.2%, and cow slaughter is down 17. Beef cow slaughter is down 17%, and so on. So our total beef production so far for the year has been down about 5%, and so that shows up in the lower beef production. But why then? eh, Back to my question, why in 2024 could we have the same amount of beef production we had as 2023 when we had fewer cows? Remember, we lost 936, almost a million cows in 2023, and yet beef production in 2024 was the same. And so the answer to that is quite simple, is on the bottom, is that simply we fed the cattle longer and put more weight on them. And so here's the steer dressed weight. All my charts are color coded the same, where red is the current year and light blue is 2024 and purple is 2023. In this case, I even have an average on there, which is the green, but they're all color coded the same. So you see the seasonal trend in dressed weights and the heifer weights would follow the same, is for them to decline throughout the year as we have more calf feds and so on, and then the hotter weather uh, you know pre prevents gain as much as or somewhat down to a low there in June, and then to pick back up. So go to last year, that blue line, we did fall off dramatically last year near 2023 levels, and the big decline there was mainly due to bad weather down cattle feeding. There was a lot of rain and cold and snow down there, and cattle don't do very well. But then when we got into February and March across there, instead of going down seasonally like we usually do, we actually contra-seasonally increased weights and went up, and we're averaging 25 to 30 pounds per head per week. For the year, the equivalent was about the equivalent of a million more steers and heifers being slaughtered, even though we didn't have them, and because we made it up with weight, with carcasses being 40 pounds uh, pounds heavier. And why did that happen? Was that some conspiracy or something to produce more beef or something? And the answer is that, I can explain everything by supply and demand and economics with prices and everything else. And it just made sense for everyone to do that. For one, looking at, we'll look at the corn prices in a minute, but corn prices were going down. So feed was cheaper. Replacement 800-pound steers into feedlots were getting higher and higher and higher price. So easier feedlots keep the cattle longer because their replacement were higher and feed was going down, and they could do that. The packers wanted more weight and were telling feedlots to put more weight because beef was selling very well and they wanted more to sell, and we didn't have it in numbers. And so the consumers were better off because they got more beef than they would have, and we were better off throughout the chain, and it made good economic sense to do that. But again, that we added the equivalent of a million cows there, which is another reason why we aren't going to increase numbers like we did up to the previous cyclic high, because we don't need them. We had just basically leveled out that million head decline. Now this year, again, we started off as we left off last year with heavier weights, 40 pounds above, but now we've continued down last week about 19 pounds, and I think by the end of the year we'll likely be about the same. We can only, you know, we could see a big increase by feeding those cattle longer, but once we feed them, because we had short supplies, but once we do feed them longer, then by time we get to now, that starts to negate then we've the lower numbers and get back there. And so, beef production is declining. And so, but, all of that very supportive to prices. So let's get into prices now. And as we move along here, and I want to talk about cyclical versus seasonal prices. And when we get into the seasonal prices, show that because, even though our price cycle is moving higher, that doesn't mean prices can't go down. And maybe I should save my spiel there until we get to the seasonal and show you. But here's the price cycle for, our 550 to calves in the darker blue in North Dakota and the 800 pounders there in red, and then fed steers actually have to go to South Dakota or Nebraska, but that's what would be the price that we get for them there. So anyway, look at the previous high there and back in 14 and into 15, and then the big decline. And I showed you why the big decline is because we increased the beef herd very rapidly, and we're able to do that because we had the replacement heifers. And so it's going to take longer this time. Here we are, the last couple years we've seen, big, huge increases in prices more when we get to those market classes. We're thinking now into next year that prices will level off because herd rebuilding has kind of started and would be level off similar to what they have in previous cycles and the last time. So the big increase, we are showing a little increase into next year. And but again, that doesn't mean on a seasonal basis that prices can't go down, and we will see that. And again, this assumes no black swan events or some huge thing that comes along. One of our worries has been consumer demand, which has held very, very strong, and more on that in a little while, and is holding strong. But we have high credit card debt and other issues at the consumer level. But there we are, all-time record high prices, at least on the average this year, and expected to hold into next year similar, which is good news if you're selling cattle. So let's get into the individual market classes of cattle then and talk about them. I suspect you are most interested in feeder cattle prices, but the three biggest things that affect feeder cattle prices are number one, fed cattle prices, and then particularly the fed cattle futures prices into the distance when the feeder cattle that you're selling would reach market weight. So that's a big thing. Supply is another thing, and we already know, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We know supplies are low, and fed cattle prices again are near record levels. We'll talk about here in a minute. And then the other thing that affects a feeder cattle prices or corn is what I'm going to get to. So here's fed cattle prices have been going up every year. I could put more lines on this chart. Our cyclical low was in 2020 back. Interestingly enough, we had at the bottom, would have been at the bottom of the chart, we had $95 cattle at this time, fed cattle back in 2020. So we increased in 2021, shown on the chart here then is 2022, green, and purple's 23, 24 is last year. And, one thing about last year, you see fed cattle prices were very similar to what they were last year, when at least some people's expectations were they might be a little higher. But we already know the reason why they were about the same as last year is because beef production was the same in 2024 as 25. And remember, it's the amount of pounds of beef that we produce that has to be sold that's prices. It's not numbers. That's not numbers of cows. It's the pounds of beef. So We were very similar in prices last year, although a little bit higher. And then this year, as beef production has declined, and on top of it, demand has held very, very strong, even with record high prices at the retail level. Their fed cattle prices have just been higher and higher. And in the last couple months, especially, our record high there was just 3 weeks ago when we were up to 243 on a live basis, or it's about 384 on a carcass basis. The last 2 weeks we dropped off just slightly there to 242. This week so far, it's looking like we're probably could be to 245, 244, 245, which again would be a record high on cash prices at the fed cattle level. And then there's the futures markets close yesterday, and so 238.50 right up there, close to 239 is the August futures, and showing the futures are showing off a little bit, but not much into the end of the year, and we'll have to see if that happens. Usually we do have at times a spark in prices at the end of the year. We didn't in 2023, but for some other reasons, but usually, and so at least they're obviously, even if they go down a little bit, will be still record high levels. So that's very supportive to feeder cattle. Then next year, the futures market prices are in gold. And again, to begin the year, they're up kind of where we're probably going to leave off. The futures market, the last part of the year is kind of risk off there because it's a long way out. USDA is predicting very, very good prices. They raised in the last WASDE report came out last week or so. They raised the forecast for fed steers this year from 221 up to 227. You see they're up in the 240s now, but they start out 200. So, they did raise it to 227, which likely could be the annual average. And interestingly enough, for 2026, they had been predicting 228, which would be just a little bit higher than this year. And the last was the unprecedented for USDA to increase prices as dramatically as they did. Usually it might be $1 some, but they increased them from 220 up, 228.50 up to 243.50 for, or 243.50 for next year. So USDA is more optimistic than the futures market is, but right now that's where prices are, which obviously is supporting feeder cattle prices. And the reason why cattle prices are high is because meat is selling. There's the cutout value, which packers can sell meat for on the top, and it was record, almost hit $400 back there. And it always does go up into spring, to get the holiday demand for barbecuing beef and the Memorial Day, 4th of July, and so on, then backs off seasonally a little bit, spikes a little bit now to getting ready for the Labor Day weekend, and it spiked pretty well. And we're going to go this week. We've been over 400 the whole week, so we're going to set a record high cutout value this week, over $400, and that's why packers can pay what they are for fed cattle. And as you see in the bottom, beef is not backing up. Our cold storage numbers are down, so it's moving at record high prices. And that means even last year, where we had beef production the same, prices went up, which means demand is increasing, demand is improving, which is absolutely good news for selling cattle. The other part is the export market, and again, the other is domestic demand. So we'll talk a little bit about the export market. Our major beef customers on a dollar basis are Korea, Japan, China, Mexico, and Canada. That's what they've been the last few years. And go over to the right-hand chart. Last year, exports were just a little bit above 2023, and the reason our exports were the same last year. It's just the prices were higher, so then value a little bit higher. They started out the same year through March about the same way, but then tariffs hit, the tariff situation, and so that backed off our export value. But that was all due, as you see on the bottom, to China, where China is not taking very much beef now. From a tariff standpoint, really not a lot has changed since even prior to the previous Trump administration. The Trump administration, under the Trans-Pacific Partnership, we had agreements with Korea of, I think it's about 2.7% tariff. Japan is continually going down from tariffs up at 28, 29% and going down every year to going down to about nothing into the future and at 21% now. But now, Trump did a unilateral with Korea and Japan in his last administration, and that held through. And now they just renegotiated both Korea and Japan to keep those the same. And so nothing has changed there for a number of years. And so those are still, we'll look at the customer at the amount in a minute. China is the big one. Beef exports to China that fell off because we have, China has put very high tariffs back on, up around 80%, and on top of that, they have not approved most of the packers and wholesale plants that would send it to them. They have not approved them. It's kind of a non-tariff trade barrier. So the one place that we're dealing with, and we're hoping that we can get some new thing. It would be with China, Mexico, Canada. We're still under the U.S.-Mexico trade agreement that was signed by President Trump in his last administration, and that's zero tariffs into those countries, so they're plugging along as normal. And so, just looking at the numbers, then. There's Korea in green and Japan. These are then uh, 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 of not weight, not value, but they correspond. Still doing very well into Korea. We're always a month behind there, but even the highest we've had in a few months in Japan. It's China where we really struggled last month. Our exports were up a little bit to both Mexico and Canada. So, from an export standpoint, we're doing just fine, except with China. And looking at that chart, go back to 2020. Before that, you see hardly any beef to China. Then Trump negotiated the phase one agreement where we went up. In fact, in 2022, when we had a lot of beef to sell record beef, China was up there, right begging along with Korea and in Japan for our number one customer, but is backed off. They're producing now more and more beef in China, and then that's when the tariffs hit. You see, backing off to about nothing. So that's remained to be seen. I'm thinking, we probably will get an agreement with China. They're very tough negotiators, and that's the one remaining link. So again, from a supply standpoint, here's the feeder cattle supplies outside feedlots on July 1st. Again, the lowest on the chart. So we've got low numbers of feeder cattle have supported prices. And on the top of that, because of the New World screwworm on that chart showing that we aren't getting feeder cattle from Mexico. The Mexican border has been closed since May. It was closed, last November, but then did open up in March. And so, we would likely be getting, they've got drought down in Mexico, as you see in southern Texas too. So we'd probably now be getting 15, 20,000 head of feeder cattle in from Mexico that we're not getting. So that further reduces the supply of feeder cattle. And then the other thing about feeder cattle then is corn prices. And not good for corn farmers selling corn, but you see 2023, we went from 7 down to 4. These are Omaha corn prices. I like to use Omaha because that's where our feeder cattle go to be fed, and that's what they can with what they pay for corn determines what they can pay for feeder cattle. One thing that isn't getting a lot of press, and one of the reasons why feeder cattle as high as they are right now, is because on the top we changed corn 10 cents a bushel, changed calf prices a buck in the opposite direction. So certainly the corn market, and USDA in the last WASDE predicting the record 16.7 billion bushel corn crop, and so the lower corn prices certainly supportive to uh, to feeder cattle prices. They're up there. That 331 was a ethanol plant bid in North Dakota. Our prices are usually lower in North Dakota. That's why we background a lot of cattle up here and then send them down to the feedlots to be finished off. So here's calf prices. Right now, just the last months in particular, been really, really going up, and we're unbelievably about $100 higher than we were last time. Like I said, prices can go down, and we saw that in fed cattle, and they can go down seasonally, and they did last year, and likely they are going to fall into fall like they usually do, and so they won't be as high as they are now, but they're still supported by all the things that affect prices at higher and at record high prices than last year. And again, this 416 is an average price. There's always a wide range in prices. I suppose they're, when with the volume start coming in, we'll have a $30-$40 range in prices for the same weight and grade of calves at the same market for all the different things that affect them. So, right now we probably got 440, $50 a few selling at that, and maybe some at 380, but in the middle there is 416. So just plugging along there, unbelievable that $100 higher than last year, and they will be higher in the than last year in the fall, but I do expect them to decline seasonally some like they usually do. Same thing on the heavier weight feeder cattle. They've just been, increasing up and up with the lower supplies and the cutout going up, and so fed cattle remaining high and futures, and so we're up there at 357 or something last year. Again, about $100 higher than last year. There's the feeder cattle futures market remaining, kind of at those levels the rest of the year, and so on. So, supportive to selling cattle. Go to cull cow prices. Same story. As I said before, our beef cow slaughter is down 17% this year, and good demand for hamburger and so on. And my chart here, we don't have North Dakota. USDA doesn't report prices like they do for feeder cattle and cows, so I have to go, and it's tougher to get South Dakota and Montana. South Dakota just kind of dropped off reporting in Montana. So, but my prices here are kind of in the middle. It's like feeder cattle. There's a wide range in cow prices. I looked at a market report last week, and there were cows selling for 185, as you see in the top, and 129, but I'm at 155 here, kind of in the middle of that. So, I'm not saying you'll get 155 if you sell a cow, or I'm not selling you'll get a 183 or 130. It's low yielding cows are lower and higher yielding cows, but the trend is the same. Again, our expectation is for cow prices to fall this fall, like feeder cattle, when PG checking comes and we do, some normal culling and so on, and more cattle come to market, the cow prices will back off, but still be at record high levels. Here's cow slaughter. Like I said, has been down every year. That's supported cow prices, and so far this year, cow slaughter down 17%, indicating, that there is interest in herd rebuilding and maybe not as many cows selling. So just kind of end up, I know some of you watch the futures market, and the futures market has been very, very volatile. And so I tell producers, hey, let's, forget watching the futures market. Here's the August futures, and then the cash settlement price is the average of all 7 to 899 weight or cattle all throughout the U.S. from North Dakota down through Texas, as reported by USDA. That's the green line. Kind of one thing to watch there, you see, is the futures now are getting above the cash market, and right yesterday by about $10. The futures are down a little today, and I kind of expected that because the feeder cattle contract matures the last Thursday of this month, and the two have to be the same. The traders will do that because it's no longer the future of the cash market. So that's a thing to watch if you're planning to do livestock risk protection or something like that, you're watching for a time to do that. Maybe a good time to do that is when we see like what we do now. The futures are like it was yesterday. Futures above that cash market. Not saying that the cash market might continue up, and it probably will this week with Fed cattle being higher and so on. But going back, just go back in the chart. It gets a little bit higher there into just going past August a little bit, got up above the cash market. The futures crash back down. $9 that day. Why did they do that? Well, they're above the cash market. One fund starts selling and taking some profits because they've been long, and then another fund sells it. Then they get that out of their system, and then the cash market's going up. So then the futures have to go back up with the cash, and so then they trade the trend as their friend, and so wham, back up it goes like it has. So we're going to keep up with that volatility, that's for sure. So you know, volatility is going to remain high. There is risk, particularly with demand or with black swan events. So, like for backgrounding cattle, you're putting the highest cattle prices ever in cattle in, and so maybe getting some protection there for cattle coming out in March or April might be something to consider this fall if you're going to background calves or something. I'm not saying, even though the price is cyclical higher, they can be seasonally lower and so on, and always some risk there. And we don't know what's going to continue to happen with trade and tariffs and so on. So, just, some words there. I think from a backgrounding standpoint, maybe it'd be better to have at least some covered with LRP and not need it than need it and not have it. And the market is very volatile there. So uh, we're nearing the time here for maybe take some questions from you and see what you really have more interest in. And there's always risk. Corn isn't in the bin yet. And so, we don't know what the final crop will be, and we've got geopolitical things going on in the Middle East and Russia, Ukraine, and all those kinds of things that could escalate and would cause the market to react negatively and so on. So, that would be another reason to do risk management. But seeing it's about time for me to quit, Amanda, I'm just going to stop there and see if we have any questions.
Thank you, Tim. I did want to I did unmute everybody. So if you do want to chat and speak directly to Tim instead of typing it in, you have the capability. You will just have to unmute yourself. And I also did put in the chat the direct links to Ag by the Numbers and the Market Situation Outlook webinars from NDSU Extension. So, Tim,
Yeah.
one question I did have. So do you see the outcome of this tariff war? How will that be impactful to the livestock market, specifically from the first tariff war to this one? Do you see some of the similar trends, or I know there was some good and bad you talked about that happened. So
Yeah. I see similar. Again, we're good with four of our top customers with Japan and Korea. We've all already settled. There's some talk back and forth with particular Mexico, but meat is under the former USMCA that President Trump has been holding meat on that way. And so China is the big thing. The question is, since exports to China have fallen off a lot, and yet we still have record prices. Would prices even be higher? And that is a good question. I can't really answer that. Actually, there have been some other countries pick up some beef from us that weren't before, that maybe that would have went to China, and some South American countries, for instance, and some others. And so it would certainly would help the market or be positive. And I think, last time we got an agreement with China, China's playing hardball with us now, and they have increased their beef production in China. And so maybe they probably don't need as much, but I think we'll get something solved there. But I think we're going to end up similar to where we did last time, and with an export market similar into the future.
Do you see China buying a large amount again? I know after the
No, I
last
don't
one.
I don't see them buying as much as they did before, but I think they would buy, if we get things settled with them that they would buy more, but I don't see them buy them as much as did before because they don't need as much. China's trying to diversify in everything. They're trying to find other customers to send them soybeans, sorghum, everything that, they depended at one time really, really a lot on us. And Australia is close to China, a lot much closer than we are, and they did not take beef from Australia up until a little while ago, but they've opened up to them some more now. So they're trying to diversify and not be as dependent on one particular country. And so I think that for them to take levels like back in 2022, it will not be the case, but still more than they are now, when they're playing hardball with us.
Gotcha. Um, so I know you talked a lot about beef. Can you briefly touch maybe, I know a lot of this crowd in North Dakota is mostly beef production, but how is this impacting a little bit on the poultry and the pork side of things?
Okay, well, interestingly enough, the demand for meat is hanging well because of there's these new GLP-1 drugs that people take for weight loss, and protein goes along in that menu, and high protein diets are in vogue now. So that is helping the entire complex. Seems like it's helping beef more. Hog prices are better than they were last year, and chicken prices are a little bit better. They haven't went up to the degree that beef has went up, and yet consumers are buying beef. What the research is showing on the beef side of it is that uh, when you buy, and this not hamburger is, always sells well, both at the restaurant and the retail level, because that is kind of lower price. But on the higher price cuts at restaurants, we see that the restaurant traffic for steaks is dropping off somewhat. But on the other hand, it's really picking up at the retail, because instead of people going to restaurants and paying that $40 or whatever it might be at a higher class restaurant, they are buying the steaks retail, cook, uh, cooking them home however they want to, barbecuing them. They're cheaper. They don't have to pay the restaurants have all the overhead they have to cover with their labor and their building and everything, and it's higher. So they can buy the same steak and do it the way they want to, cheaper. So the retail business for the higher cuts is still doing very, very well. And, it goes back to good taste and so on. And also these diets where people that are after meat and high protein.
Well, thank you, Tim. I don't see any more questions coming in.
Okay.
So again, thank you everybody for joining us today. Check out NDSU Extension's webinars if you want to learn more about all the markets besides livestock. Um, Again, thank you to him for your time, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Um, our next webinar again is September 19th on the Farm Bill, or the Big Beautiful Bill update. We'll also be having one on October 16th that might interest you. That's on estate planning and transition with Russ Tweeten from Ag Country. So with that, everybody, thank you again. We hope you take your exit survey at the end and have a good day. Thank you,
Okay.
everybody.
Yep.
Bye.
Thank you for having me. Goodbye.